I can't remember a single game that has impressed me and let me down all within the first few hours in the way that Watch Dogs Legion did. It's genuinely one of the strangest games I've ever played. It's a game that introduces some really unique systems that I've never seen in any other game before. And in some ways, it's very impressive, but in other ways, it leaves me questioning what the whole point of the game was. See, Watch Dogs Legion has a bit of a reputation on YouTube. Channels I enjoy watching, who've also served as inspiration in the creation of this channel, such as White Light and That Boy Aqua, have some great videos on the game. Videos that made me curious as to what Watch Dogs Legion is all about. Is the game really that bad? Is it really that much of an enigma? And what was Ubisoft thinking when they were developing it? Those are all questions I'm going to explore answers to. So here we are. This video is going to be everything I have to say about Watch Dogs Legion. The Watch Dogs series, in my opinion, has always been one of Ubisoft's most unique. It takes the standard open world formula that we've all come to know, but makes them more interactive than really any other game. Watch Dogs 1 was brought out to the E3 floor and had viewers in awe, not just due to its graphical prowess, but the way the player was able to manipulate the city by changing the streetlights, spying on citizens, and controlling basically anything that was connected to CTOS. Watch Dogs 2 changed the tone substantially, moving on from Aiden's stoic nature to a more upbeat and generally less serious tone, but maintained a lot of the interactivity that made the first game special. Watch Dogs Legion doubles down on this tonal shift, leaning into a lighter mood despite dealing with some really serious issues both politically and morally, and given the nature of the game's narrative, I would have loved to see a more mature and grounded tone, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So I'm actually going to approach this video by breaking it down into three subsets, those being the narrative, the gameplay, and the open world. By the way, if you're enjoying this video and like videos just like this one, maybe consider subscribing. Okay, let's actually start with the gameplay because I have a lot to say here. I came into this game expecting the worst, and to be completely honest, I was initially so impressed by what this game had to offer. For a couple of hours, I was actually sitting there and thinking to myself about how everyone was so wrong about this game. By now, you probably know what the game is about, so I won't go too deep into the mechanics. But the whole premise of Legion is that you're able to recruit any NPC on the street that you come across. The game generates these NPCs procedurally, from what I can tell, with each character having a unique appearance, a voice actor, a backstory, and a set of traits. The various perks that they come equipped with can be quite beneficial for you. For example, one person might have advanced hacking skills, others might be more stealthy, and some might even be more useful for going in guns blazing. This premise is actually very interesting, and it's something that captivated me for a while. I was often just strolling through the streets of London and scanning all these different characters to see who would be a great addition to my team. But this whole system, which is really cool and creative, just sort of falls flat on its face when you start reaching towards the mid and end game. See, pretty early on, you'll go through and recruit a bunch of people. All these different operatives have their own strengths, their weaknesses, and general use cases. The problem is that once your team is settled, then you really never interact with that system again. This issue is further compounded by the fact that most missions can be completed using these same basic hacking tools and approaches regardless of which character you're playing as. See, personally, I had my squad set in stone about 6 hours in. I had an advanced hacker, a construction worker who had a cargo drone, and a guy who carried firearms. This was basically all I ever needed to complete the whole campaign. Now, of course, that's just my experience, but that's kind of what it boiled down to. Don't get me wrong, I was still pulling out my phone and scanning random pedestrians for the hell of it, but I never felt the urge to go and complete the recruitment mission once I was settled. Yes, everyone you want to recruit requires you to complete a mission for them. These recruitment missions range from simple fetch quests to more complex infiltration scenarios, and basically they're designed to reflect the recruit's background. For instance, if you're recruiting a doctor, that mission might involve helping them expose medical corruption. That's not that big of a deal, but some of the best recruits require you to help a certain district become defiant, which in itself requires a series of side missions, but more on that later. There are some other interesting tidbits about this whole thing. For example, your team members can get kidnapped by an enemy group and you need to go and find them, or they can be arrested leading to jail time, and if you die during a mission, your character might end up in the hospital, meaning they're unusable for a set amount of time. You can even toggle on a permadeath mode where if your operative dies on a mission, then they are gone for good. Honestly, it would make sense for that to be on by default, as it would make going on missions and choosing the right operative for the job a lot more crucial, and the need for constant recruitment a necessity rather than something just to do on the side. Either way, the actual system implemented in this game is really impressive, but at a certain point, it just didn't feel like this was the type of game to implement it in. In fact, I was wondering what kind of game would work for this type of mechanic, and I really just couldn't come up with anything, but maybe you can in the comments. The game just ends up providing you with this huge pool of interesting operatives with all sorts of traits that can be beneficial, but the foundational problem beneath that system is the simple fact that the mission design never calls for any of that. I'll explain that in a bit. So, generally speaking, I think the game really excels in allowing you to approach missions how you see fit. It truly is a sandbox in every sense of the word. This is something UB usually excels at. Unless, of course, you're playing Star Wars Outlaws, that originally had forced stealth missions that was very anti-UB, so it makes sense they ended up patching that out completely. Anyway, the way you approach missions in this game is kind of cool, but ends up getting stale also fairly quickly. You see the theme we got going on here? The freedom to go in guns blazing, or send in a spider drone that you control remotely, and even just stealthing around to hack from a distance are all possibilities that the game offers you. It's really a game where your creativity and problem solving will carry your experience. Every mission usually comes with a number of different ways to enter a building. Maybe you come in through the roof or some side door that isn't heavily guarded. There's even missions where if you're wearing a certain uniform, like the Albion contractor kit or maybe a construction worker outfit, then you can pretty much roam freely within these mission areas as long as you're not seen running or getting too close to enemies. But the mission design ultimately ends up becoming stale because your objectives never really change much between missions. You'll almost always be infiltrating some enemy base and working your way through said base by acquiring digital keys to open doors or shutting down some server. Every now and again, a mission will ask you to eliminate some people, but those don't come around too often. The overall lackluster variety in the mission design is a very big pitfall for a game that gives you so many creative tools to use as you see fit, but ends up betraying its own operative recruitment system that is a very integral part of the game's design. It honestly just gets boring. I'm not exaggerating when I say that from the very first mission up to the final few, you'll be doing the same thing over and over again. Sure, the setting might change and the scenario on how you go about getting to your objective could also shift, but in the end, it all boils down to the same thing. I hate to sound like such a reductionist, but there's generally hardly any unique scenarios that you'll be faced with. To add to that, most of the time there is this puzzle solving aspect where you turn these red nodes into green nodes. These puzzles are relatively easy and sometimes just trial and error is enough to get you through. This same puzzle mechanic is done over and over again throughout the main campaign. It would have been nice to at least have to decipher or crack different mechanisms, but no, this is basically how they all go. Sometimes you'll control this spider drone, other times you'll control these flying drones as well, but that's kind of it. The mission design never calls for any sort of special test. It's just a complete failure on Ubisoft's part. What's the point of me going and recruiting this drone specialist if this same exact mission can be completed by a guy using a stun gun? There's never a real rhyme or reason behind any of it. Wouldn't it have been much better to have certain missions be beatable only by certain operative types? Let's say a mission requires hefty firepower, then the last person I would bring in is my hacker. Or a particular mission requires advanced hacking capabilities that your run-of-the-mill operative just can't pull off. This would give me reason to go and find these operatives and engage more with the whole recruitment bit. But none of that ever comes to light. You can essentially complete the whole game with the most basic operative, and yes, that means even those you start the game with at the very beginning. The only thing you'd be missing would be probably some game mechanics that are available to certain operatives, like maybe controlling a personal drone or something. Overall though, I just felt like the mission design is very one note, and it did not complement the whole operative mechanic at all. Anyway, I'll always give credit where credit's due, and I think one of the greatest accomplishments of Watch Dogs Legion is the open world. There are more positives to it than negatives. Firstly, I think it just looks great. I'm not from London, so I can't speak on the authenticity, but as far as looks go, I had a great time exploring the city. It feels dynamic the same way many Ubisoft open world games do. Surprisingly, though, it's not an extremely large map. Like, it's much smaller than a typical UB open world map. It's much more focused and packed with different activities to do. And the detail they've managed to pack in from the different buildings, the variety in architecture, the different vibes and feels to the different districts are all really well done. I didn't mind the smaller map size at all, but it just kind of feels strange coming from Ubisoft. Driving in this game is kind of a mixed bag. In my notes, I wrote that it felt like I was trying to handle a wet bar of soap. Cars will often fishtail randomly, and the handling is just very arcadey. It's not something I personally took a liking to. It's a world where there are only electric cars on the street, but Ubi did a decent job of creating a good amount of different car models, from like supercars, buses, to your run-of-the-mill SUV or sedans, and there are also motorcycles as well. Of course, the faster cars control more wildly. To me, the driving reminded me a lot of Ghost Recon Breakpoint, another Ubisoft game. That game also felt very loose, and losing control often was an issue, but was far worse in that game when you went tumbling down a massive mountain rather than just crashing into a streetlight. Okay, let's talk about the narrative. Watch Dogs Legion's narrative starts out with what amounts to DedSec being framed for a number of attacks across the city of London. These coordinated bombings target key infrastructure, which include the parliament. This kills several civilians and politicians, essentially creating this huge catastrophe in the city's security, and it completely destabilizes the entire city of London. A rival organization known as Zero Day basically puts together an elaborate plan in order to essentially eliminate DedSec. This approach ends up being effective, as DedSec was more or less smeared all across London, and their image was completely ruined. The attacks by Zero Day rendered DedSec all but obsolete and gave space for Albion to rise up. Albion, of course, being a private military contractor that the British government ended up hiring as an emergency in response to the crisis that took place, and their role was mostly to provide security when the traditional law enforcement couldn't. So, as you might expect, Albion oversteps their boundaries by harassing citizens, implementing their own rules, and unofficially seizing control of London. That is until you come along, or should I say, three of you come along. Watch Dogs Legion doesn't follow a single character. It's unique in that sense, and instead of being a single protagonist, the game features a legion of characters. So the game begins with 3 randomly generated starting characters rather than the predetermined protagonists, and these initial recruits basically serve as the foundation for rebuilding DedSec from scratch. You and your crew reignite DedSec by linking up with a well-known former leader who's pretty much in hiding since the attack. This character is Sabine Brandt, a former DedSec operative who did survive Zero Day's Purge and has been working underground to gather intelligence and resources for what is going to be essentially a counterattack against Zero Day and Albion. I'm not going to dwell on the narrative and all the different themes it tries to convey. I think the overall story is extremely predictable, and what it boils down to is another power-hungry person who intends to seize control of the city. You and your group of Legion friends rise up against this tyrant and bring the city back to the control of the people. We've seen this time and time again, and honestly, there are really no memorable characters nor plot points that are really worth exploring. But that's completely Ubisoft's fault, and here's why. Watch Dogs Legion was built around this play-as-anyone concept from the ground up, replacing the traditional single protagonist of previous Watch Dogs games. But this approach meant sacrificing the deeper character development and narrative focus that defined earlier entries in the series. Aiden and Marcus are easily recognizable. The first Watch Dogs followed Aiden's personal story of how a job gone wrong led to the death of his niece, and his quest for vengeance essentially being the driving force behind the game's main story. Sure, it's not entirely original, but it's something that's worth playing through. You are Aiden, you are Marcus. In Legion, you are that random person on the street. You aren't someone who has gone through any problems. At any moment, you can switch to any member of your group. This, in essence, takes away from the very thing that just about every video game tries to focus on, which is building up the main protagonist. The character switching mechanic means there's no single character to level up, develop relationships with, or follow through a complete character arc. This obviously undermines the traditional story techniques and doesn't help you build an emotional connection with the specific protagonist. It's honestly one of the strangest decisions I've seen any developer make. Like, I totally get it, I understand what they were going for. They're attempting to make something to showcase the power of the people coming together who have been wronged by the system some way or somehow. But wouldn't it just have been so much better to build a single protagonist and have them recruit these NPCs who can go off on their own missions or something. This approach would have maintained the concept of building a resistance movement while preserving the narrative structure that allows for character development. You could have built a legion to assist you or assist the population, but you most definitely did not have to play as one. This is half the reason why the game fell so quickly apart from me within the first few hours. I never felt attached to a single character, and the overall plot was already so paper thin that it generally became difficult for me to push through the final hours of the game. I have no idea what the future of the Watch Dogs series is. Will we ever see another Watch Dogs title? It's been over 5 years since the release of Legion, and there seems to be complete radio silence as far as whether another title is in the works. Truthfully, I do see a future for this series, mainly due to how technology continues to rapidly evolve and generative AI becoming more ingrained in our daily lives. I can definitely see Ubisoft eventually trying to take this and make something out of it. As far as Watch Dogs Legion goes, honestly, it's a game that started out great but was ultimately a letdown due to its extremely lackluster mission design, very predictable story, and a narrative that isn't driven by a single protagonist, but instead by a bunch of randomly generated people. Those critique videos I watched before playing this game on my own were totally right. Unfortunately, Watch Dogs Legion really is that bad. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one.